is America's game. Now, stop humming this here, everything done changed. That WoRP tool make you open your brain. Eric Vanek is here, so remember the name. He got the waiver wire for the week. Tell you who to start and who to give a seat. Dropping the podcast every week. You know the knowledge is elite. After the show, we gon' hold a Lombardi. Celebrating like we throwing a party. This the blueprint and I know they gon' copy. Harmon intros always go the hardest, cause this is America's game.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to America's Game, episode number 28. I am your host, Eric Vanek, and you can find me on Twitter at Eric Vanek NFL. And this week, I am joined by Koopa. Koopa, what's going on, man?
Not much. I'm excited to be here, talking quarterbacks, and coming in to do these WoRP episodes as you go through all the different positions this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of quarterback WoRP today. Going to look through a bunch of different leagues and see how WoRP affected the quarterbacks and kind of what we learned this year about the quarterbacks. But first, just kind of get your thoughts. What do you think about this Super Bowl coming up, man? Coming up this Sunday.
I'm excited to see it. I'm a little bit disappointed that the Ravens didn't get there. We grew up right outside of Baltimore, so I grew up with the Ravens, but I am actually a 49ers fan at heart, so at least I've got one of the two teams that I wanted there. So I'm just hoping that we don't get the Chiefs win the Super Bowl and Travis Kelce proposes to Taylor Swift on the field and all that whole storyline I could do without. 49ers win and just put a dagger into all of those parlays that Mike's been talking about that he wants to bet on. So just cut it off right there. Make Brock Purdy a Super Bowl MVP. And just really stab it right into Mike. That's what I'm hoping for.
That would be interesting. So do you think the Chiefs are going to win, or you think 49ers, or you just kind of root for 49ers?
I'm definitely rooting for the 49ers. But in terms of who I think's going to win, I think it's going to be it's really going to come down to, do the 49ers work around what the Chiefs defense is? And I'm actually thinking that it's going to be a little easier for them because the Chiefs they got a little banged up in that Ravens game, and so they've lost. I'm blanking on his name, that edge rusher that tore his ACL. Like they lost him in the Ravens game, and now they aren't going to do as well against that 49ers. All right, we're just going to either run it right up the gut with Christian McCaffrey or flip it out to the edge, and just they do a good job of taking advantage of getting their guys into space, and the Chiefs, I think they might not match up as well against that. I feel like they do a much better job and a little bit more of a man type defense where they can kind of shut down the major playmakers on the opposing team. So I'm hoping the 49ers can overcome that. But anytime Mahomes is on the field, you have to consider the Mahomes factor, that he'll find a way to pull the rabbit out of the hat even when there isn't a hat. So so you're going to be going up against one tough team, and they have a good defense, and it's kind of reminiscent a little bit to me of those Tom Brady days where Tom Brady's got the cast of who's here, the receivers, but he's turned them into guys that like, oh, I know that name because Tom Brady throws it to them, and really it's that defense that's keeping them in the games, keeping them that major competitor, and it's Tom Brady buckling down in the fourth quarter, going down, making that game-winning drive.
Right. Yeah, speaking of hats, you like my hat?
Yeah, I'm liking it. If only the Cowboys could be in the Super Bowl, then maybe it'd even be a little more fitting. But
it could be. Yeah, I figured I'd wear my cowboy hat today. I've seen on social media it's like the in thing to wear right now, so I'm just wearing it, man. Gonna wear it for the episode, see how it goes, see what kind of reaction we get.
And, at least it looks good.
Yeah, right. Right. All right. So let's jump into some quarterback warp here. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip this over here. Let's go over to here. Change this up, and then we're gonna go to this share screen for everybody so we can look at the old warp calculator. All right, so there we go. There's our warp calculator that we're going to start with today. So me and Koopa are just going to kind of talk about, look through some of these leagues and go through everything here. Um, is there anything that you kind of learned about quarterbacks with warp this year? Kind of just off the top of your head.
In general, there seems to be, and it all depends on the scoring of your league. Where the exact cutoff is, but there seems to be a range of usually a top four. Sometimes there's a top two and a top four of guys that separated themselves, and then there's another cutoff point around like a quarterback 14 or quarterback 15, where where there's another tier drop off there. But in general, this past year, you didn't see that steep of a curve where the difference between quarterback 5 and quarterback 14 was really that much. And so you ended up with a lot of this scenario of the last offseason we were talking about, man, you want to have one of these top 8 quarterbacks and try to move up to get a second top 8 guy. But if you didn't move up and get that second top 8 guy, you probably did just as fine as the person that did, unless they moved up so far that they got themselves, say, like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Like, okay, somebody that ended up with that, they got quarterbacks number 1 and number 2. So they did pretty well for themselves. But in general, you kind of see those 3 tiers. And depending on the league, that 1 and 2 kind of blends into 3 and 4.
Right.
And so we're going to be seeing that here, this first league that you have pulled up, that there's not really a clear difference between 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4, but there
Right.
is 4 versus 5 and then 14 versus 15.
Right. Yeah, I noticed like when I was doing one of my team reviews, it was like that. There was, it's like a top 15, 16, and then after that, it like cratered. So, yeah, after that everyone was kind of the same. So, yeah, this first league I got pulled up was just a different league. So we're gonna start with like kind of just a vanilla league. I have just a regular vanilla PPR league here. So this one is going to be a 6 point per passing touchdown start 11 league and a lineup league. So we're going to go over that one first here with the quarterback. So as you could see with the quarterbacks on here, they're still pretty king. They're the highest warp of all the positions in just a regular vanilla league here. Over the wide receivers, running backs, obviously tight ends. I think I made these all 1.5 tight end premium as well. So the tight ends, obviously, you can see as they don't matter as much. But yeah, I mean, let me get rid of these running backs and receivers, tight ends for now. I mean, as you can see, just your regular 6 point per passing touchdown leagues. Josh Allen was up there. Jalen Hurts was up there. Dak Prescott, he led the league in touchdown passes. Lamar Jackson's up here because of his rushing. Jordan Love, he was second in the league in touchdown passes, and here he is. He's up in fifth. So, you kind of see obviously you're going to want the guys that are going to throw touchdown passes in a 6 point per passing touchdown league. Mahomes is up here at 6. Purdy was at 7. Tua 8. Jared Goff 9. And Baker Mayfield was 10. So pretty solid top 10 there. I did notice in a lot of these leagues when I did look at them, Baker Mayfield was pretty much top 10 warp quarterback all season long.
Yeah, he did a good job from a fantasy perspective of hitting that threshold of where I was saying like that top 15 guy. Like there wasn't a whole lot of difference between Baker Mayfield and even like your Patrick Mahomes. And so that was actually really cool to see. It'll be interesting to see come next year how that looks. Because as we know, everything is is going to be changing over there on the offense, getting a new offensive coordinator there.
Mhm.
But maybe he'll have a good contract that he likes, and that gives him some stability for once. It sounds like he has a team that actually likes him, as opposed to the Browns, like, just the first sign of him struggling being like, hey, he's on the hot seat. So hopefully he can parlay that into next year and keep going, and keep it up and stay in that top 15 range where he's at the same level as those top tier guys that are either having a bad year, or those guys that we consider top tier that are just having a normal year for them. Because, like, your guys like Tua, we think of him as a top tier quarterback, but in reality he's never really produced at a WoRP level that makes you think he's a huge difference maker.
Right.
He's just consistently been one of this top grouping of quarterbacks where, yes, having a guy in this range is important, but he's never been up there with your Josh Allens, your Jalen Hurts. This past year it was Dak Prescott and Lamar Jackson that thrust themselves into that category. But Josh Allen is the only one that has stayed there year over year for an extended amount of time. Jalen Hurts, I think this is his second year being up in that range.
Yeah.
But you're going to see a little bit of change year over year, and in who are the quarterbacks that end up in that difference making range, and I just don't really see Tua ever doing that.
Yeah.
So I think he's a little capped out, and if you're staring down the barrel like, hey, I've got Tua or Baker Mayfield, and Baker Mayfield, I'm sure he's going many rounds later in your startup drafts, compared to Tua. Like, if you're trying to build a contender from the get-go, or maybe you are a team that you're turning the corner from a rebuilder into a contender, Baker Mayfield's not a bad get, and not a bad guy to take a shot on and say, hey, he just needs to do about what he did last year.
Right.
You aren't trying to shoot for Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. Like, you don't need that production all the time. Sometimes you can have some different options at the quarterback position.
Right. So one that popped out to me on here was CJ Stroud here at 1.64 WoRP. Obviously we all like CJ Stroud. We think he's a top quarterback, but what do you think about him being down here at 12? Do you think he might be kind of like overrated a little bit, or do you think he's about a little bit right?
I think that CJ Stroud in the overall Dynasty ranks, where, like, keep trade cut, it has him all the way up at like quarterback 3 or something like that right now. I think that is overblown.
Right.
But if you change the week slider to just be, say, week 9 through 17, he rises up these ranks. His second half of the season was better than it was earlier in the season. And so I like being able to have him higher up in the rankings because he's a rookie. He had a good finish to the season. Hopefully that runs into next season. They get him some better weapons to throw the ball to, because the cast of characters he was thrown to was not great. But he doesn't give me the concerns that somebody in a bad like, Houston's a really good situation. They drafted him, and then they listened to him. He said, hey, get me Tank Dell. I like this guy. He's going to do well. They draft Tank Dell off of Stroud's recommendation. Tank Dell comes in, and Tank Dell produced.
Right.
And so they seem to like him down there in Houston. They like they like everything about him. He's their franchise guy. And I think that I'm not saying it's wheels up for him from a Dynasty perspective, because I think he is capped. He's not one of these premier rushing quarterbacks that's going to rush hundreds of times, or more than like 120 times a year, get you 800 rushing yards, all that kind of stuff. He's going to be a guy that, yes, he can do enough with his legs to get you a little bit of that floor, but he's going to be consistent, and he's young, so you can have him for a long time. His value's not going to go down in the next 4 or 5 years unless his production takes a tumble.
Right. I
And
mean,
so
just
that's
kind of
what I like about him.
right. And then, like you mentioned with Stroud's rushing, he had 39 carries, 167 yards. He's down probably like here in the 20s somewhere for rushing yards or quarterbacks. Just to kind of put that in perspective, Daniel Jones only played 6 games and he had 206 rushing yards compared to Stroud's 15 games. So, I mean, he can run a little bit. We've seen it before. He had 3 rushing touchdowns as well, so he's not afraid to run it at the goal line. But he's just never going to be this, up in these tiers of 400, 300 yards rushing, like Mahomes had 389, Russell Wilson 340, Trevor Lawrence 339. Maybe he could do it for like one season, but to continue it and do it every season, I see him more in like this probably 200-yard range. So he's not going to make like a super big difference in the rush game for you, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so if you're looking at that 200, extrapolate that over 17 games, you're realistically only looking at like 1.5 fantasy points
Mm-hmm.
per game coming out of his rushing. Whereas if you're looking at what makes a true like number one overall quarterback, which
Mm-hmm.
is if you're valuing him at QB3 overall, you think he has the potential to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Those true number one overalls are the guys that are rushing for 500 yards, 600 yards, 7 or 8, like all the way up in that range of rushing yards, and he's
Mm-hmm.
just not anywhere close to that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look on my rankings, I've got him at quarterback 6, just because he's young, he's looking good. I like how his future looks, but I don't think that WoRP wise he's going to be that true difference maker that you need him to be. He's going to be that solid guy that's in this quarterback 5 to 15 range that you need one of those guys at least. If not, you
Yeah.
want both your quarterbacks to be above quarterback 15 for sure.
Right.
But one of those guys is going to end up in that range. And the advantage to CJ Stroud is he's young. If something happens, if he sprains his ankle, he's going to be out for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can trade away CJ Stroud to some team that's not contending, get a replacement quarterback back, and be able to keep going, and it doesn't completely tank your run.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I'm sure there were a lot of teams that had like Aaron Rodgers, and they were like, "That's going to be my quarterback 2. I'm making my championship run this year." Week 1, tears his Achilles, and their entire championship run was dead.
Right. Right. Another thing with Stroud too. I mean, we're looking at the WoRP here of Jordan Love. So Jordan Love finished 5th overall at 2.09. Well, first question is, do you think like the 2.7, 2.5, I didn't really go back and look. Do you think that's kind of low compared to years past for the WoRPs, for the quarterbacks? Because weren't they more like around like the 3 range?
So they tended to be a little bit higher. I always like to compare it to where they were to the other positions. The
Okay.
exact number doesn't really mean as much to me
Okay.
compared to what is the difference between where the quarterback was and the wide receiver and the running back and the tight end.
Okay.
Because one thing that can trip you up if say you look at a start 16 league, because I have one of those in my portfolio. The top players don't get as high of a raw WoRP value just because at a certain point a singular player cannot affect the lineup near as much, and so it just slowly starts to decrease as it goes on. And so that's why I'm looking at these differences. But going back to your point of in 2022, there was more quarterbacks that were doing better. In 2021, the quarterbacks were like by far and away the king, and same within 2020. Like if you go back, you'll just see that. If you go back in time, you'll see the quarterback line rise, and if you keep moving forward, you're like, hey, that quarterback line is falling and falling and falling. And some of that just comes back to, hey, the NFL, what are they doing? It's the defenses are getting better. They're figuring out how to prevent these big explosive plays that were happening in the passing game. They're forcing a lot more of this underneath action, a lot more of this, hey, we need to slow roll the game. We won't have as many possessions. We won't score as many points, but we're going to kind of grind out the enemy team and win that way.
Right.
And
Okay.
and so that's affecting the quarterback play. The quarterbacks are not scoring as many points. There's not as many touchdowns being scored. There's not as many yards being gained. And so that's kind of muting everything. And that's happening to the other positions as well, but when you start comparing that overall difference, it's affecting the quarterbacks more than it is the other positions.
Yeah, I was listening to a different podcast, and they said that this was the lowest scoring season since like the early 2000s. I forget what year it was, but this was overall like a very low scoring season, and I think there was like, I want to say he said something crazy like 80 touchdowns less than the year before or something like that. I forget the whole stat, but just scoring, from the league was completely down across the board. But what I was bringing up here about CJ Stroud is, okay, yeah, he had whatever it was, 23, 25 touchdown passes. If he has a Jordan Love type season next year. So CJ Stroud 167 rushing yards, Jordan Love had 247. So that's 80 rushing yards there. He gets that another 80 rushing yards there, and he gets into the 30 touchdowns. Like CJ Stroud is going to be up in this top 5 probably range where Jordan Love was this year. So it's not like we're completely saying Stroud's a bust or we don't like him or anything. I still really, really like the player. But his path to being a top 5 WoRP quarterback is going to come from his passing touchdowns. His rushing touchdowns and rushing production, it can go up a little bit, but it could stay like where Jordan Love was this year. Jordan Love with the 5 rushing touchdowns definitely helped, but I think Stroud could get to that 247 mark. I think that's doable for him.
And the problem for having Stroud get to an extremely high WoRP value is WoRP likes when you are consistently in this case, because we're looking at Superflex, if you are consistently a top 12 quarterback, if you are better than the average quarterback. And the way Stroud is, if you look at how a lot of his games went over the course of the season, he kind of fluttered right around that mark. His good games, like he got up to quarterback 6, quarterback 7. I think he had a quarterback 3 in there somewhere. But he also had plenty of other games where he was still quarterback 15, quarterback 16, 17, things like that. And while that's still better than the replacement player, which would be a quarterback 25, there's going to be a certain amount of, if you can't get over that hump, you just aren't getting too much out of it. It gives you really small WoRP values. Whereas if you can get over that, you can consistently be the top 12. That's what makes guys like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts so deadly. Is almost every single week they are in the top 12. When Patrick Mahomes in 2022, he was just on an absolute tear in WoRP, and that's because he was consistently hitting that top 12 mark. And so that's how they end up propelling themselves higher up in these WoRP charts. Right. And so CJ Stroud's only going to get that if he's doing a ton of passing work and it's resulting in a lot of touchdowns. They're scoring a lot of points. He doesn't have the ability to easily make that up with yardage like a different rushing quarterback has the ability to.
Right. So another thing I did here on the WoRP tool, I changed it to week 10 to week 17. That's when Kyler Murray played. I was just kind of curious where Kyler fell in just through these weeks if we use those weeks. And he was at 12, so that wasn't too bad. But you can also do this on the WoRP tool as well. If you have a guy like Kyler and you want to say, hey, where was he in WoRP? Not for the full season, because obviously he's going to have a bunch of zeros for the first 9 weeks. But if you want to look from week 10 to week 17, you can see where these guys where did Kyler stack up to Patrick Mahomes? Well, he was 5 5 quarterback spots better than Mahomes here, 7 spots better than Stroud. He was better than Tua. So you can kind of get a gauge of how good Kyler was in his 7 games that he did play over like Mahomes and Stroud, Tua, some of these names down here, Justin Herbert. So
And
that's actually pretty impressive.
if you're trying to compare guys, say, I know Anthony Richardson didn't play too much this season, but if you're trying to play like Anthony Richardson versus Kyler, that's why I did the WoRP per game. So
Right.
so you can look at that number to do that across the whole season, and it allows you to more easily compare a guy like Anthony Richardson versus a guy like Kyler Murray. Is to be able to see that whole time frame, see how guys who see how they did over the course of the whole season in the number of games that they played. Because
Yep.
obviously we can't project injuries. Like, that's just, if somebody comes out with an injury projector and it's actually right enough of the time, they've won fantasy football.
Right.
And so we want to look at how are guys doing when they are on the field, and that's what WoRP per game is for.
Exactly. So I just pulled it up quickly with Anthony Richardson in his first. It's not giving it to us in that. So we'll have to go back to this. His the first 4 weeks that he did play. So we'll go quarterback here. Switch this over. So Richardson was quarterback 11, and that was through 3 games. Everyone else had 4. They're not counting his injury game in there. But yeah, I mean, still pretty impressive to see where he was at up here.
And so if you sort it by WoRP per game, like, he should shoot up a little bit more there too. So you click that button. So now he's. Yep. I don't have the number. It looks like for that, but
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, yeah, he was 8th.
So he bumps up to 8th through that.
Yeah,
and so.
And you could see how he did compared to some of these other guys. Like, look, here's Dak all the way down here. And Dak was, finished top 5.
Yeah, and so you can kind of see a little bit too of like the small sample size. And I think coming out right today, the day that this episode released, is also going to be my team review that I did with one of Slumno's teams. And I talk a little bit about how quarterbacks in terms of WoRP do really well across a whole season, but when you do a shorter window, they tend not to do as well compared to other positions. So when you're looking at an entire season, I describe it as the idea that quarterbacks get you into the playoffs and get you first round buys, but they don't necessarily win you championships.
Right.
The quarterbacks are much better for giving yourself that high floor that just makes it tough for anyone to beat you. They need to have a massive spike week if you have really good quarterbacks. But when it comes down to championship week, you need to rely on your other players on your team still hitting in order to win the matchup. Right. The difference between your spike week from your quarterback versus your spike week from your wide receiver is that bonus amount of points that you're going to get is less for the quarterback compared to the wide receiver.
Right. All right, so we're going to switch over now to a 4-point per passing touchdown league, kind of just vanilla, regular PPR league, super flex, all that. So when I bring that chart up here, now look at the wide receivers and running backs compared to the quarterbacks. Pretty much your top 11 to 12 wide receivers are better than a lot of these quarterbacks. When you get to the top 4 quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Dak Prescott in this format, they're pretty much up there with everybody. You had Keenan Allen's up here, Amon-Ra, Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb, those guys beat them, but you could see how much the position drops off there in a 4-point per passing touchdown league.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at, okay, in this 4-point per passing touchdown, you can also see how much starker that difference is between those top 4 guys and number 5. When we were looking at the 6-point per passing touchdown, it was a little bit more of a linear line going down, and now we actually have a closer to a horizontal line and then a drop.
Yeah, so
it accentuates even more that rushing factor of the quarterback. Where the guys that are throwing a lot of touchdowns, it's harder for them to make that guys are rushing the ball on the ground.
Right. So that's a .4 difference between Dak Prescott 2.273 and Jordan Love at 1.89. So it's a .4 difference there in win per game, or wins over replacement for that one.
The other way I like to say it too is the difference is wide receiver 5 versus wide receiver that looks like about 12 is the difference between just quarterback 4 and 5.
Right.
So when you're looking at, okay, where's the value between different positions, that's a clear tier break where, all right, if I'm trying to decide between whether I'm getting quarterback 4 or whether I'm going to be able to get wide receiver 5, well, if it's going to come back around to me and I'm going to get a chance to get another quarterback or wide receiver, say in another, if we're looking at quarterback 4, so another like 12 picks or so, I'm going to have a better shot of getting somebody equivalent at the wide receiver position. Whereas at the quarterback, there's a clear drop off there. Right. And it's the same thing if you're trying to trade up. I'm more willing to trade up and get the 104 than I am the 105, but it's a full tier break. I want to be able to get myself into that higher tier. And since one of those top 4 is Dak Prescott's not being taken in the top 4. So really it's the top 3. So when I'm talking about how do I value players in Dynasty, how much I'm willing to trade up for, I'm willing to pay much more to get a top 3 startup pick than I am the 104. If the guy, oftentimes if I'm trying to trade up, I'm sending out offers to 101, 102, 103, and then I just stop. Because once I get to 104, now I can supplement with those guys that are going in the second round. I don't need to trade up into the early first in order to get those guys and get equivalent production anymore. Right. So I'm taking advantage of that value of, okay, it's relatively similar across that whole range.
Right. So another thing I'm noticing here too is from right here at quarterback 6, Mahomes, 1.78. So let's say quarterback 16, 1.347, Matt Stafford. Like, just look how pretty flat this whole tier is. Even if you get down to Justin Fields and Derek Carr's 1.1, so, Mahomes is 1.7. So it's not like a huge difference. In a 4-point per passing touchdown league like this, say you're doing a startup this offseason with those settings, are you more like, willing to load up on wide receivers and be like, okay, I'll just take Matt Stafford and, Trevor Lawrence is my starting quarterbacks here. I can get some of these guys maybe in round 3 or 4, even later with Stafford, probably Baker Mayfield's up in here. Yeah, quarterback 11. Is that kind of an approach that in this kind of a format and 4-point per passing touchdown you would kind of take?
I am definitely willing to do that, and click on the WoRP per game graph because I think that's going to help showcase this point even more. So if we remove tight end out of the picture, look how flat it really gets from. We were talking about, hey, there's that top 15, and you can see that drop off after top 15 here, but then even 16 all the way to like 32, that includes like all the backup quarterbacks that are coming in and replacing these down starters, and it's really not that much different than the guys that are in that quarterback 15 range. And so I'm more willing to gamble on, okay, let me get the better wide receivers because those are the better WoRP guys.
Yeah, obviously.
And I'm going to fill up with, I'm going to make sure I have 2 starting quarterbacks, and then I'm going to be very heavy on the waivers. And I did this all last year when Jake Browning was announced he's going to be starting the rest of the season. When Gardner Minshew was announced he's going to be starting the rest of the season.
Yeah,
like
Flacco,
I was very, very aggressive on getting those guys and spending that fab. And you have to go into, I think something that a lot of people don't really think about is how they spend their fab. They think of their fab as, okay, I'm willing to spend 30% on this player, 20% on this player, and they come up with that each week.
Mhm.
I like to think of my fab as I want to invest it in certain positions. And so I'm willing to dedicate 90% of my fab in a league like this to I'm going to use it to get myself backup quarterbacks that are going to be starting the rest of the year.
Right.
The other 10% I can use to throw an extra $1 so that way it can beat everybody else out on when Cam Akers gets traded to Minnesota or when Tyler Goodson becomes the starting running back for Indianapolis. Like I'll put $1 so that way somebody doesn't get him for free.
Right.
But that's what the 10% is for. The 90% is that way I can get those backup quarterbacks. That way they can plug into my lineup, and that's how I'm filling holes. But that only works in a league like this where, hey, quarterback is muted compared to the other positions, and the backup guys are close to the starters because the 4-point per passing touchdown makes it such that all the scoring of quarterbacks is muted. So even if that guy who's better throws for one extra touchdown a game, that's not as big of a difference. Whereas when we were looking at that 6-point per passing touchdown, the league just before this, there is more of a difference there. I don't want to be relying on a bunch of these backups, and instead I want to have those better quarterbacks.
Right, exactly. Because like you were talking about too earlier with the WoRP per game for these quarterbacks. So Trevor Lawrence was quarterback 16 at a 0.1. If you go to quarterback 32, which is Geno Smith 0.07, there's just not much difference there at all between quarterback 16 and 32. So
and so what that WoRP how that WoRP calculation works, it means that by having Trevor Lawrence any given week, you are 3% more likely to win with Trevor Lawrence than you were with Geno Smith. It's
Right.
not that much of a difference. It's well within variance.
Exactly.
And so, but if you look in that range in between Trevor Lawrence and Geno Smith, I'm sure you can find backup quarterbacks that are in there that were filling it out for you.
Yeah, there's Sam Howell, Nick Mullins, Josh Dobbs, Stafford's in there, Anthony Richardson, Taylor Heineke, Gardner Minshew, who you mentioned earlier, Watson, Tommy DeVito. Yeah, so those guys you could get in there. You did bring up a good point there with Fab too. Like, I think with the way most of our dynasty leagues have gone, like, you know, if a running back gets injured, somebody already owns that backup running back or the third guy behind them. In most of our dynasty leagues now, because they're just so deep, like it's not like 10 years ago where that guy was probably on waivers and there was a big fight to get that running back on waivers. I think the big fight now is to get these quarterbacks when they go down. Those are the guys that we're spending all of our fab on.
Yeah, for sure. And some of it is just like we don't necessarily realize like we think we know who the backup is until the week comes and all of a sudden, hey, that rookie that they drafted in the 6th round who's been the third quarterback that hasn't technically been active for any of the games, he's the starter for this next week, kind of like they did with Aiden O'Connell where they put him as the starter instead of putting in Brian Hoyer, even though Brian Hoyer was dressed as the backup every single game. And so those are the guys that you can try and snag off of waivers because unless your league is so deep that there's somebody out there rostering every single backup quarterback, you're going to have guys to fight for on waivers, if not every week, at least every other week.
Right. I found it interesting too here. Stroud moves up 4 spots in the 4-point per passing touchdown league. So that's interesting compared on the WoRP.
And that probably comes down to yardage.
Is what it is, right?
Because yardage is worth more in a 4-point per passing touchdown because the touchdowns are less. And so, but you look at, okay, how much more does CJ Stroud need to do in order to vault himself past past Patrick Mahomes and up into the Dak Prescott, into the Lamar Jackson, the Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts tiers? There's just so much that he needs to do that I just don't really see how he's going to do that unless he starts running the football more.
Right. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and switch over to point per carry league. So This league that I'm in is a 6 point per passing touchdown league with man, it doesn't seem like that's right. I don't know why the quarterbacks are so much lower on this. I'll have to check that out. Let me find another one of my point per carry leagues that I had. We'll do Dynasty Masters. This is 5 point per touchdown league with a point per carry, so that's a little better. So yeah, in this one, obviously, running backs with the point per carry being in the league are a little bit higher here. Wide receiver is pretty much, same as the flat tier that we were talking about earlier there for the wide receivers, look how far they go down, and then the quarterbacks. So let me get rid of these tight ends here. I'll just get rid of wide receivers and running backs too. So in the point per carry leagues, now look, here's Jalen Hurts at a 3 WoRP. He's the leader there. Josh Allen 2.9. So the guys you expect to be up here, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, even though he led the league in touchdown passes, he's still up there at 4 with 36 touchdown passes. Jordan Love with his 32 touchdown passes. Mahomes is still up there. He can run a little bit. Purdy was pretty proficient this year too. Jared Goff is 9th, and C.J. Stroud was 10. So you can kind of see, like, having Jalen Hurts, having Josh Allen, having Lamar Jackson, 2.7, 2.9, 3. And then you go down here to quarterback 7 at Purdy, 2. That's almost a full, win over replacement from Brock Purdy to Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, these elite rushing quarterbacks.
And notice what it took for Dak Prescott to get up there to match the 3 rushers is it took him leading the league in passing touchdowns.
Yeah.
And the guy who was second, Jordan Love, he's down there grouped in with everybody else.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't make it up to that level. He's just the top of the second flat tier.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about, okay, what does a quarterback that doesn't rush need to do in order to be a true WoRP difference maker? They have to lead the league in touchdowns. They have to have such an amazing passing season that it's impossible to ignore. And so that's why I get skeptical of when you look at, okay, C.J. Stroud, what did he do rushing-wise? Well, he only rushed it for 40 times. He only got 150 yards. Like, he needs to really up that rushing game in order to be a difference maker. Same thing if you look at anybody else in that range. Brock Purdy's never going to get up into that top tier range unless he starts throwing for a ton more yardage and a ton more touchdowns. But you can have guys that are able to do a ton in the rushing game, and it doesn't need to be like world breaking like Lamar Jackson is, but even talking about somebody like Russell Wilson, still ran it 80 times for 340 yards. Yeah, that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but he gives himself a giant floor that if he has an all right passing season, now he's close to being in that conversation of guys that can be a difference maker for your team.
Yeah. So if you look at like the quarterback rushing leaders this year, obviously you're going to see Allen, Hurts, Lamar up there, and those are the top 3 guys. The other one that's always up there high in rushing yards is Justin Fields, but look how far down he is here. He was quarterback 17, even in a point per carry league. I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that just comes down to you still need to have at least all right passing,
right?
In order to make it. You can't have just rushing. If he was a running back, I'm sure it would look much different. But at quarterback, you need to have the combined of both, because even if you're throwing it, if you're going against the quarterbacks that are throwing for 250 yards a game, you're still going against, they're getting 10 points from all those yards. And then if they throw for 2 touchdowns, they're at 18 points. Even if you rushed for 60 yards that game, you're only at 6 points of the way to that 18. To get those 12 more, you've got to throw for another touchdown, and then you've got to throw for another 200 yards just to make it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Fields did miss 3 games compared to everybody else too, but still, He just didn't have like the rushing touchdown numbers that Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen did. 15 rushing touchdowns apiece. Even Lamar, he only had 5 rushing touchdowns, 821 yards. But it was still, his passing was up there, obviously, with an MVP type season. So Lamar was able to stay up there, but Fields was not. Anyone else on this list kind of stand out to you a little bit?
The the biggest one that I just want to point out again is we talked about Tua Tagovailoa and hey, like what is his true ceiling? Well, right below him's Jared Goff. Like
Right.
that's a big difference in terms of especially a year ago where we were valuing these guys. They're much closer now in
Mm-hmm.
terms of where they are valued because Tua didn't really he kind of stuck around where he was in that like third round startup range, and Jared Goff has now vaulted himself up probably into that fourth round. But the the those sorts of guys, this is their ceiling. Like they're going to be able to maximum get you up to this quarterback 7, 8, 9 range, and they aren't going to go much higher. They don't run the football that much. They do everything through passing, unless they
Mm-hmm.
have an absolute career year. That we talk about Dak Prescott throwing for 36 touchdowns. If they do that, sure, they'll be up there in the WoRP conversation.
Right.
But seeing these guys up here, it's a little bit it if people like to see a name and they go, hey, I like that guy, I could see him getting higher next year. I don't think it's realistic to expect that out of either of those guys. And same thing
Mm-hmm.
with Brock Purdy right above them. It's like you don't want to really expect them to take that leap forward,
Mm.
just because it's so rare that somebody actually does that.
Right. So another thing that I like to do personally with point per carry leagues, especially if I'm doing a startup in the off season, I'm if I get a derby pick or whatever, I'm getting to pick my draft spot. I definitely want one of these top three picks if I can get it, so I can grab Hurts, Allen, or Lamar Jackson for sure. And then if I'm going to, I'm just going to try and take the risk and trade up and see if I can get like an Anthony Richardson type, or maybe even I could wait till round two if Justin Fields is there. I in point per carry leagues, I think just having those absolute monster rushing quarterbacks is just such a huge advantage. It's like almost like in your regular lineup redraft league, having Travis Kelsey all these years at tight end. Like, I just think having the point per carry quarterbacks every single week is just such a massive advantage. And I've found that a lot of my teams that I've done that with, like last year, I had a Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields team, and it was pretty much, first or second place all season long, just having those two. So, yeah, having those rushing quarterbacks in these leagues and point per carry leagues are just king for me. So I gotta have those guys.
And even with Justin Fields missing 3 games and having an absolute abysmal passing season, he still ended up quarterback 17. Like he's still in that range of, hey, this guy can fit in my super flex spot. He's not
Mm-hmm.
outside of the top 24. And so they are just such a cheat code that hey, when they do have a good game, they're going to put up monster points. And if
Mm,
they don't, they have a floor enough you aren't going to lose because you had them in your lineup.
right.
And that's ultimately that's what you need on your team, and that's also what WoRP really likes. WoRP likes guys that hey, they're in your lineup consistently, so they aren't going down, and then that they're having those above average weeks because those are the ones that are actually winning you your matchup.
Mm-hmm. I just want to kind of look through here for the first 4 weeks for Anthony Richardson because he was like an absolute cheat code there at quarterback for his first couple weeks. Let's see. Yeah, so Anthony Richardson's right here. 0.359 for WoRP for the first 4 games, and that's only counting 3 games. These other guys are getting 4 games out of it. Um, so yeah, Richardson, definitely a guy I want to target. If I can get a top three pick, I can get Allen, Hurts, or Lamar Jackson there in the top three. I want to see if I can trade up to like 8, 9, somewhere in that range. Even if I have to give like my second and a fourth or something like that to move up to get Richardson, I'm gonna go ahead and do it because pairing Lamar and Richardson together, that's just gonna be crazy scary good for your quarterbacks spots there, especially with Richardson. I don't know if you heard me on the on last week's episode with Mike. I really think Richardson is like almost a lock every single year for 10 rushing touchdowns plus. I mean, he had 4 in 3 games. And that dude was just running like a madman, and he's gonna be hard to stop at the goal line. Um, Tush push stuff. I mean, obviously Shane Steichen ran it there with Jalen Hurts last year. They're gonna do it. He's gonna do it with Anthony Richardson too. So I think Richardson, getting him in a point per carry league, especially, that's like almost a lock. 10 plus touchdowns every single season just on the ground.
Yeah, and the other thing to look at is if you take his 3 games, you take the WoRP per game, he bumps himself up 4 spots, and
Okay.
he's up there walking in that range with where Jalen Hurts was over
Yep.
those first 4 weeks, and
Yeah, he's
I
better than Lamar.
and he's better than Lamar, and so extrapolate that over the course of a full season, and yeah, we're looking at, okay, yeah, Josh Dobbs was here number 3, and Andy Dalton was up there at number 1, but Andy Dalton only had 1 game.
One
Josh Dobbs
game,
had
right?
2 games. Like, when you're starting to piece together, okay, what does it look like for the guys who consistently make it up there? You pick any sample, like you're gonna have Jalen Hurts, you're gonna have Lamar Jackson, you're gonna have Josh Allen consistently being in that range. Like
Right.
Dak Prescott at the beginning of the year, he's way down there at the bottom. He's
Yep.
quarterback 24,
Yep.
and it's because he doesn't rush the ball. He doesn't have that high floor, and now, he finished the season off throwing a ton. He led the league in passing touchdowns, as I've said multiple times here. That's what vaulted him.
Yeah.
But that is also more inconsistent. Whereas getting these rushing yards from a guy like Anthony Richardson, a guy like Justin Fields, all the names we've been saying, having that floor is what you need for your team. And then as long as they're a halfway decent passer, you're going to do really well. And if they're a really good passer, then you're going to get some of those monster spike weeks that just flat out win you a week.
I think another sneaky guy that I look at is Daniel Jones. Like, if he can play the full season with his rushing numbers that he's shown in his career, he could be another 400, 500 rushing yard type guy. So Daniel Jones is another guy. If you can get that as your quarterback 3, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small sample size last year of 6 games, but he was 4th in rushing yards per game.
Right.
And so he's definitely somebody that you can go out and get, and he can fill in that spot in your team as long as you trust the Giants to fix that passing game. So I think some of it comes down to, hey, what do they do in the draft? Do they get a wide receiver? If they do that, okay, maybe they're starting to fix the passing game for Daniel Jones, because we all know he was thrown to nobodies this year.
Right.
And but if they end up, say, a guy like Jaden Daniels ends up falling to them at 6, and they take Jaden Daniels, that's where you got to put your dynasty hat on and be like, hey, Daniel Jones might not be here for very long. I probably don't want to invest in this guy.
All right, so let's go ahead and switch it over to best ball now. So these are a couple of your best ball leagues that you had brought up pre-show to me. So this is Dynasty Best Ball League. I'll let you go ahead and talk about the WoRP here for those quarterbacks.
Yeah, so this league is just a 4-point per passing touchdown best ball. The only other bonus setting is if you get a 40-yard touchdown rush or reception, you get an extra 4 points. So other than that, it's basically all standard. And so the thing that I like to see when I'm looking at best ball is, where can I add guys together to make up a guy in a higher tier? And can I? What is the difference between, say, the top 4 quarterbacks versus quarterbacks 5 through 15? And
So yeah, the top 4 is a very distinct, right here, Josh Allen, Jalen, Dak, Lamar, huge drop down to Jordan Love.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that unlike in some of the other leagues that we were looking at, where that difference is almost a full warp between, like a full point of warp between number 1 and number 5, we're only looking at like a 0.75-ish. Like we aren't looking at near as much of a difference in this league. And so I can, with 2 quarterbacks that are in that 5 through 15 range, add up my warp to match one of those top guys. Maybe I won't have as much of a ceiling out of that specific lineup spot. But if I give myself, say, 5 guys between the quarterback 5 to 15 range, and then that's it, my quarterback position, I'm able to match somebody that has just 2 of Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. And I've done that way cheaper. If you target the right guys in that 5 to 15, you target Baker Mayfield, Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, and Josh Dobbs is just outside of it at 16 there. Like you target those guys, you've done that so cheaply, you can roll all that value into a different position. In this league, wide receivers are the dominant position, so you can roll that into all of your wide receivers, have a strong wide receiver core, and that's how you try and win your league. So it's all about balancing out, okay, where's my cutoff with these quarterbacks? And so you could go for having, if you end up getting yourself the 101 to 103 in the startup, like, yeah, still go get yourself that Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson type of player. If Patrick Mahomes is in that list, like any of those guys, sure, go get that. But you aren't forced into having to have one of those guys in order to win the league, unlike a quarterback heavy league. And you can make up your quarterback difference by getting a bunch of these lower tier guys at value.
So looking at, like you mentioned here, the wide receivers, this is one thing that this warp tool will do for you guys. So if you guys go and purchase this warp tool and check out your leagues, you'll see in like this league, man, like how king wide receivers are. Yeah, sure, you need to have some quarterbacks, but all your, assuming 3 receiver spots and how many ever flex spots you have, minus the super flex spot, you want every single week, you want wide receivers probably hitting those spots, because look how much of an advantage they have over the quarterbacks in this league. They're pretty much above the quarterback at every single point here. So just kind of, that's one of the important things about the warp tool that you can see for yourself just in the data here, like how king wide receiver is compared to the quarterback position in this league.
Yeah, and in this league, it's 3 wide receiver spots and 2 flex spots. It comes out to a total, I think, of a start 10.
Yeah.
And so if you can even compare that with those wide receivers to the running backs and see, yeah, wide receivers are higher in this league as well.
Oh yeah.
And so I know this show is talking about quarterbacks primarily, but the warp is designed to help you identify where the tiers are in a position, and then where those tiers compare to tiers of other positions.
Absolutely.
And so as we're talking through this week, as we're talking to in future months of going through different positions, everything is relative. That's why I'm saying in this league, I'm fine going with multiple of those quarterback 5 to 15 types, because that's what's ideal to get the most bang for your buck in terms of the value that you're spending on the position. So that way you're saving it for elsewhere.
Yeah. So if you were doing a Dynasty startup this off-season, best ball with those settings from this league, and you kind of see your warp graph look like that, if I'm like picking towards the end, I'm picking 10, 11, 12. Mostly everybody in your league is going to be hammering the quarterbacks like they always do in Superflex leagues. I'm probably going to double tap. Can I get CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson? CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase? Can I get 2 of those guys with my first 2 picks? And then round 3, round 4, maybe I can get these other quarterbacks. Maybe I can get Tua or Goff as one of my 2 quarterbacks. Like, can I get a Baker Mayfield later? Can I get Geno Smith later? Derek Carr later? And like you said, having those later quarterbacks in that range are going to add up in a best ball league over time to reach up to those guys, and then you're already killing them at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed either to playing a little bit of as long as it's not like a South Harmon league where we're all going to hoard the quarterbacks from each other and make you
Right.
pay a huge premium. Like it it ends the draft with only having like 2 guys. Like if you only end up with say Derek Carr and Matthew Stafford, like okay, that's fine. I have 2 guys, so I don't look super desperate. And you end up with a ton of these wide receivers, and you use a little bit of flexibility there of okay, still can trade before the season starts. I can trade once the season starts. We talk about having the ideal roster construction for best ball, but I'm I'm a big proponent of not forcing anything to happen too soon,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't need to start week 1 with my absolute smash 'em fully optimized lineup.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine week 1. Yeah, I might only have 2 actual good quarterbacks, and if one of them throws up a dud, one of them throws up a dud. But I fix that over the course of the first 4 weeks. Maybe I identify because at the last offseason, if you had said Baker Mayfield was one of the quarterbacks that you wanted, like he was somebody that was really concerning. Like, is he going to
Mm-hmm.
last 5 weeks into the season?
Right.
But you see the first couple weeks of the season, you're like, hey, this guy's doing well enough. He's going to keep the starting job. Okay, now you go and get him, and you
Yep.
start to fill out your team that way.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's when you trade away the guys that aren't doing as much. Like Jordan Addison he was showing enough to be intriguing to somebody that was trying to keep a young team, but he wasn't really doing enough where it's like, yeah, he's going to be the
Mm-hmm.
guy that's going to help my team win a championship.
Mm-hmm.
So you trade Jordan Addison, you get yourself a lesser wide receiver and Baker Mayfield, and now you're starting to fix some of those positional holes that
Mm-hmm.
you started the season with.
Yep.
But you got yourself into that position by going heavy at wide receiver in the startup draft to begin with.
Yeah, and then you continue to be aggressive on the waiver wire as well. You get those Gardner Minshews, the Jake Brownings, the Joe Flacco's. You get those guys as well on your team, and they're gonna help elevate that quarterback position, even if you started with Stafford and Derek Carr, like you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's all of it. What you want to do is by the time you're competing for a championship, yeah, you're very close to that adjusted roster construction number, and you're
Mm,
hitting that exact number that you want. In this league, I think it's like 4.2 or something like that. Um, and you're very close to that number by the time playoffs hit. But up until that point, you can kind of flex yourself a little bit, and a single week isn't going to kill you if
mm,
you accidentally fumble it. It might fumble your opportunity to be able to get that first round bye, but I tend to be someone that I don't want to overspend at the beginning of the season to try and have the best team on paper, because the best team on paper week 1 is not going to be the best team in
mm-hmm.
week 15 if they don't make any moves, because guys
Right.
are going to go down with injuries, people aren't going to do as well as they should, or players on other teams are going to do better than you were projecting them to. Um and so you have to be able to adjust over the course of the season, and keeping yourself flexible is one of those things that we learned from last offseason, and it very much held true this season as well. Of the flexible teams are the ones that are able to make that push for a championship and actually finish it off and win it.
Right. A good example of that was our South Harmon redraft league that we did right before the season started. I had Burrow and Daniel Jones as my 2 quarterbacks. This was redraft best ball. So obviously I lost Daniel Jones week 6, and I lost Joe Burrow in week 10. So I'm kind of screwed there. I lost both of my quarterbacks, but I was like 9-1. I was one of the best teams in that league all season long, and I just kept being aggressive on the waiver wire. I picked up Browning, I picked up Flacco, Tommy DeVito. Nick Mullins towards the end of the season, a couple of those guys. And just having those guys, like I stayed afloat and made, I was still the 1 seed when it came to the playoffs. So I had a first round bye, and my quarterbacks, I'm looking at them, they're like Joe Flacco and Jake Browning and Tyrod Taylor. I'm like, man, how the hell am I surviving and winning in this league every single week still? Just by doing that. So that's a good example of, just that best team on paper all season long might not be, but if you got to stay in it and stay, vigilant on the waiver wire and get these guys.
Yeah, for sure. And those guys can supplement those positions. Like
Exactly.
not every single backup quarterback is gonna be great. Like Nick Mullins probably was right at the replacement level, but Jake Browning was doing well. Like he was up there as a quarterback that actually could fight for being an average quarterback in your starting lineup, which that was a great waiver wire gem. But you can't necessarily predict those guys beforehand, so you just need to hoard them all.
Right.
And if you are the person willing to spend all of your fab and on just quarterback and not needing to get any other positions because you've had those solidified, then you're golden, and you're going to get them all, and that's how you're gonna keep that position afloat for you.
Exactly. All right, so we'll move on to another one of your leagues that you had brought up, the South Harmon Dynasty Degenerates League. I'll let you go ahead and talk about this league as well.
Yeah, so South Harmon Dynasty Degenerates was a league that was created to boost the scoring of everything not the quarterback.
Okay.
So you can see it's a very heavy running back. It is like a start 16 best ball or something along those lines. And the scoring settings are basically if there was an option in Sleeper for it to be turned on, it was turned on and there was a value in it. You get something for every first down, every rush, every reception, every big play. So it's a kitchen sink kind of league where
Gotcha.
everything is there. And you'll see this a lot in the kitchen sink leagues where the quarterback is below everything, including the tight ends. And so this is the kind of league where you really have to balance out where am I getting my quarterbacks and how many of them am I getting versus the other positions and things like that. So when I did the startup draft in this league, I ended up with this was January of 2023. So I ended up with Geno Smith, and I ended up with like two quarterbacks I didn't even know if they were going to start the following season. And I forget who they were at this point. But the way I ran with this league was what we were talking about. Of I just grabbed all the guys off of waivers. I also held on to my draft picks, and I used those to pick myself up some quarterbacks towards the end and make sure that I had that position solidified when it finally came time to get into playoffs. And that's how I'm trying to approach this kind of league. Is like even your number one quarterback is worse than the number one and number two tight ends, worse than the number three wide receiver, worse than like the number 6 running back. Like all of it, when you're comparing across positions, there comes a certain point where maybe it doesn't make sense to when if you're at pick 105, 106 in the startup to be hammering away at that 5th or 6th quarterback because they don't really mean that much. I mean, the 5th or 6th quarterback in this league is all the way over like running back 20. And so you need to pay attention to your league and pay attention to, hey, what is that difference? And most people draft the same. Regardless of what the league settings are, they go, oh man, this guy's still here available in the 4th round. I got to get him. And it's the couple managers in the league that look at WoRP that understand what it's actually saying. Like, because this was a South Harmon league, like everyone could have access to the WoRP charts and look at them and understand them, but they get so in their head about, hey, this is where somebody should go, that they don't extrapolate that back out to, hey, in the context of the league, where should they be going?
Right. Yeah.
And so you can get a lot of value just by understanding something like this. And even though we're just talking about quarterback here, understanding that I don't need these top level quarterbacks if I'm getting all this value, especially at the running back in this league, because running back is so juice.
Yep.
And you can punt quarterback and figure it out later. Because if you were to punt running back and try to figure it out later, now the rest of your league has a one-up on you, and you're going to have to claw your way back as everyone figures out that, oh yeah, if I hand you Tony Pollard is scoring me 25 points a game.
Right.
And even though in a normal league he's only scoring you 15.
Right.
And so that sort of thing is what you're going to have to fight against. And so you really, that's what WoRP is good for, is telling you this is where you need to pick your battles, this is where you need to place your value. And when we're looking at this, we can say, all right, quarterback 17 or 16 with this one. Quarterback 16 is our cutoff. We want to have probably 2 guys above that, and we'll fill in the rest of it, because we want to go as lean at quarterback as possible to be able to invest it into these running backs and get a couple wide receivers on the way, get a couple tight ends along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just by, like I said, having this WoRP tool, if you're in one of these absolutely crazy scoring setting leagues, like, this is going to help you. It's going to identify, hey, I should be investing all my picks and all that into running backs or tight ends or receivers, whatever the point is, and you can see how devalued the quarterback is compared to the other positions. So definitely helps you with roster construction and getting your balance right. So
And I will say, as much as you might think that, oh, I know how to read this league based on the scoring settings, I feel like I can pretty accurately predict the WoRP chart for a league just by looking at the scoring settings. But there's been some leagues where I've looked at the WoRP chart and it's been totally different from what I expected, just because some of the values, maybe the rushing attempts, rather than being the standard 0.25, it's up at 0.5, and you're like, oh, running back is going to be super juiced from this, and all of a sudden it's like, no, that doesn't happen as much for whatever reason, or something like that. And so there will sometimes be things where it's like different settings might cancel each other out, and you can't really predict some of that stuff that well. But the WoRP tool, it goes through and it's all math based. It's not coming up with something based, like, I didn't program in, hey, I like these settings are going to boost this position up this much or anything like that. It's based on the actual scoring of the players. And so no matter what settings you toss into it, all it's doing is going, okay, this setting makes all the running makes the running back score this many more points when they do these actions. And then it's still using the total statistics that they did over the season and spitting that number out to you. And so sometimes the mathematical number, I mean, it's very analytical. There is nothing tied to it in terms of, hey, I think this player is going to do a little better next year or anything like that. It's just raw. In the past, this is what happened. This is what it looked like. And you get to apply your future casting to it. But WoRP is going to tell you the truth. What WoRP says, this is what happened. This is in fact what happened. And so if you want to go against it and say, I'm going to do something totally different, you need to tell yourself a story of why that's going to change. And so in our case, maybe you predicted the NFL, the defenses were going to do a lot better. They were going to hamper the QBs coming out of 2021. And so you decided not to invest in QB. You're probably doing much better now than all the people who were heavily investing into QBs in the lead up to 2022. But you need to tell yourself that story. You can't tell yourself, oh, this league, I don't care what WoRP says, wide receivers or quarterbacks are king in this league that we're looking at right now, because they just aren't.
Yeah. No, you have to be flexible with your picking. Like, if I saw a WoRP like this, man, I'm taking running backs, those top receivers, with my first couple picks, and whatever quarterbacks fall to me. I will let somebody, overdraft Tua and Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence and these guys that usually are, top 2 round draft picks. Like, I wouldn't touch those guys till probably like round 4 or 5.
And the other thing is, the more people take those guys when they're like, man, Jordan Love should not be hanging out here at the end of the 3rd round. Well, when they take them, that's yet another player who
Who's
is
gonna
a
fall to
WoRP
you.
difference maker that is falling to you.
Yep. And just looking at the left side of the screen here, look at this. 4 quarterbacks in the top 22 overall players. Then Patrick Mahomes was player 40 overall. Just think about that in any of these other leagues that we looked at, in super flex leagues and whatnot. 4 quarterbacks only in the top 22 in this league. That's crazy.
I mean, Josh Allen is the top quarterback.
Yeah, and
he's
he's
number
at 10.
10.
Yeah.
Like,
So
you have 9 skill position players that are higher than Josh Allen. Like, that is some wild scoring in this league.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you're in any of these wild scoring leagues like this tool is going to help you so much. So I would definitely recommend getting into it. One more league that we're going to look at here is another league that I made up before we came on here. And this one was a start 2 quarterback league. So let me pull this league here. So yeah, so this one was start 2. What else did I have in here? Start 2, 6 point per passing touchdown.
You're going to need to hit the calculate button again, Eric.
Oh, okay. Calculate again, sorry. 0.25 per carry, 0.15 for passing first down, 0.25 for rushing first down. So that's what we're looking at here on this league. And as you can see here, these quarterbacks are still pretty king, especially when you have to start 2. Now, does this adjust for how many you have to start?
It in a way, yes. So what it accounts for is what is the optimal number of players that should get started in terms of how many players should fall into flex spots.
Gotcha.
In most leagues, the super flex spot might as well be a second quarterback spot.
Right.
Because the scoring of quarterbacks in most leagues is so much higher than your running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that you want to have a second quarterback there. If you had, say, an 8-team start 8, but there's the last flex is a super flex, it might make sense to start some wide receivers or running backs there over starting quarterback 20 on the week or something like that. And so that's where, and so it will account for that. But in this case, if you have a 2 quarterback league, it's going, yep, you have to start 2 quarterbacks. And so replacement player is going to be quarterback 25.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, as we can see here with these top quarterbacks, I mean, it's pretty much kind of the same that we've been looking at. The familiar names are all in this top, 10 or so. So nothing too crazy there. Let's take a look at the WoRP table here and we'll get a better look. There. So yeah, so you're Josh Allen, you're Jalen Hurts, and like I was talking about earlier, here's player 2, player 3, 4, 7 overall, 10th overall. So in these leagues, obviously your quarterbacks are going to go a lot higher compared to the other league that we just looked at. So yeah, I mean it changes a little bit, but you see the WoRP here for these guys. We're pretty close to what we had before, like our other leagues. So it didn't like increase it too much with the extra bonuses and stuff.
And it all depends on the level of bonuses too. Like just because you have a bonus turned on doesn't necessarily mean that position is going to be boosted higher than the quarterbacks. And so you have to balance out all those settings, and that's what the WoRP tool is good for. Is like, okay, the bonuses weren't enough to usurp quarterback as the king position, so quarterback is still the king position. But as you get into maybe potentially higher bonuses, okay, quarterback's going to get bumped down, and maybe you don't need to invest in Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, those sorts of guys as your top picks. But in this sort of league, this is the kind of league that if I've got a derby, gosh, I'm hoping I'm choosing in the top 3 picks in that derby, so that way I can get a top 3 pick in the startup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm smashing one of those top 3 or 4 quarterbacks, getting those guys locked into my roster. Absolutely. Agree with you on that. All right, so I think we've kind of looked at through all of our leagues. Is there any other takeaways from WoRP or anything else that you want to talk about with the quarterback WoRP before we start wrapping it up here?
The biggest thing that I want to say about WoRP with the quarterback is I made a point earlier about how the defenses have been shutting down offenses more.
Mm-hmm.
And how that has affected the quarterbacks and that they've not been scoring as many points, and so their WoRP has really gotten reduced. That is something that it's cyclical in the NFL. The NFL goes through cycles where the offenses figure out how to play better than the defenses, and then the defenses figure out how to play better than the offenses. We're in one of those cycles right now where the defense is playing better than offense. And so that's something to just keep in mind, that at some point it's going to turn around. Offense is going to figure out how to start doing more. We're going to have more of these bigger passing games, these multi-touchdown passing games, and when that happens, you're gonna start to see everything shift towards maybe this league that 3 years ago, in 2023. The quarterbacks were way less than all the other positions. But when we get to 2026, maybe the quarterback is now the top position to have in this kind of league.
Yeah.
And so it's something that you kind of need to revisit year after year, and reevaluate, okay, how did this past year affect things? And also do that partway through the season. How is this season affecting things? How does this compare to the previous year, what I was building off of? And you might need to adjust a little bit as the season goes on, just based on the overall trends in the NFL.
Absolutely. All right, so right here before we get wrapped up, I just want to talk over a couple things here going on at South Harmon. Right now, obviously, I just showed you guys pretty much a lot of the WoRP tool. You can use it for Sleeper and MFL. Get WoRP values for all of your leagues, as you saw. What you should be rostering. We didn't really talk about the roster construction tab, but that's there. Also, the new tab up here, available players. So if you go to your league here, it'll give you a list of who's the best available, right? Available table.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so this league is a league I just created, so nobody's on rosters. If I go to one of my other leagues here that has available players. Yeah, so this is showing me who's the best available on WoRP of who is on free agents and stuff like that. And it's perfect for startups right now, too. So this will... how often does this update when you're like doing a startup?
Instantly. As soon as the
Okay.
pick is made, hit the calculate WoRP button and it will update.
And it'll fix it. Okay, yeah. So if you're doing a startup right now, you can go ahead and use this WoRP tool while you're in the startup. Like Koopa said, go ahead and hit calculate WoRP after each pick, and it'll update and show you, hey, this is the best guy available for WoRP, that's left available. So very, very nice addition to the WoRP tool by Koopa there. So yeah, if you guys want to get this WoRP tool, it is $6.90 per month, or you could get a full year for $69 as well. There's also Dynasty Mind WoRP, the video series with Adam and Scott Connor. They go over this entire WoRP tool. They teach you everything you need to know for certain leagues, how to use the tool, all that stuff. There's different versions of that as well. So if you want to use the audio only version, that's $25. Video version only is $69. I think there's like 25 hours of video there for you guys to consume. And then $125, that gets you the video series plus the WoRP tool for a full year. So if you guys are interested in getting the WoRP tool or getting the Dynasty Mind WoRP video series, you can do that. There's different bundles that you can do. Also the lab, which is formerly our Sleepier tool. Basically, it's a league manager tool. You can see all your shares currently in Sleeper leagues only right now. Each player you own, where you rank in certain leagues in comparison to your competition. and just you get all kinds of good information on that. So it's kind of just like a league manager tool. See where you stack up against your opponents. That's also a great tool. Also, obviously, our Patreon, where you can get access to the whole South Harmon community. So look up, South Harmon on Patreon. Come join our Discord. You can get in the trade channels, post your trades to get on the trade show that Adam and Mike do. We got mock drafts every single Monday that Mike is running. I believe that's a certain tier that you got to be in to do that. But yeah, you can come join us in the live YouTube and participate in the live mock drafts that we do every single Monday. You also get the shit rankings that myself, Adam, Mike, Koopa, Christian, and Dynasty Barry are all on. I believe that's the $8 tier. You'll get access to our shit rankings. There's prospect rankings on there. There's Devi rankings on there as well. So all that is on there. There's tiers for as cheap as $1 all the way up to $25 on the Savage tier. So make sure you guys check that out as well if you haven't joined us. And then the newest thing that we just added recently, if you go to our YouTube at South Harmon FF, we just posted a couple team reviews that we did for some of our customers. So if you guys want to get a team review done for your teams, now is your chance to do it. Between myself, Adam, Mike, and Koopa will give you about a 30 to 40-minute review. Sometimes they go a little bit longer of a team that you want to have us look over. If you'd like to join us on the review, you're more than welcome to join us as well for a little extra money on that. You can ask us live questions, what we think about certain things, how we would do some trades, how are we going to use your draft pick, stuff like that. We'll help you out with your team-specific needs, recommended trades, what you should be building towards in the future. Just answer all your questions that you have. Go to the southharmonff.com website, or you go to dynastyteamreview.com, and that'll take you right to the page as well. And you can sign up for a Dynasty team review. And like I said, I just did one. Koopa, I saw you just posted one as well. I think Adam and Mike just did one too. So if you want to check it out, what it's all about, go on to our South Harmon FF YouTube and check that out. It's pretty cool. How did yours go? Did you like doing yours?
Yeah, it was fun. I had a good team to play with. Those of you who remember last August, I think it was, there was a Dynasty startup with a QB horde that caused a man named Stappa to leave the league because of the QB horde that was happening. Well, I reviewed the team that did that QB horde.
Oh, jeez. Nice. That's
And
also perfect.
he has set it up quite well. I'll say that. Go watch the team review to see everything that I was looking at for his team and what he can do to turn that thing into a full-on contender.
Nice. Yeah, I did one for Slenbo too. Really liked his team as well. I think he's going in good. He's got a good spot with draft picks and stuff, so I think he's got a really good shot to contend this year. So yeah, definitely check those out. And then last thing, America's favorite game. You want to do that before we get out of here?
That sounds good.
All right. So obviously it's Super Bowl week, so we got to do a Super Bowl question. What was your favorite Super Bowl you've ever watched, or either as a fan that you were excited for, or just one that you liked in general?
I mean, I mentioned it at the beginning of this show that I'm a 49ers fan, and I grew up right near Baltimore. So that 49ers Par Bowl, the 49ers Ravens, that was probably the most memorable Super Bowl for me, just because, I mean, a big Super Bowl party that I went to, but I was the lone 49ers fan that was there, and at least the Ravens are my number 2 team, so like, okay, it wasn't as bad when they pulled it out at the end, but at halftime in that game, like that, like feeling good, like, man, I'm the one person that's happy and excited about how the game's going. You have the light cut out in the middle of that game, and
right,
and the game gets delayed for like 15 minutes or something like that. Like, that's the one that sticks out to me the most, and it always helps when the game is really close right up to the end, and that there's a good attempt to win and the defense holds.
Right. Yeah, that was a crazy game, man. Especially with all the Ray Lewis coming into that game, his last game probably, all that, he's going to retire at the end of the season. So I was always a big Ray Lewis fan, so it was nice to see that, see him get that final win. And they were like, what, the 4 seed going into that playoffs? They weren't very high.
Yeah, I think they got in as a wild card, and then they just
that's what it
ran
was.
the gauntlet on from that. But Ray Lewis had announced he was retiring like halfway through the season or something like that, and so it was essentially the run for Ray Lewis. Like, hey, this is his last chance to get a Super Bowl. We got to get Ray Lewis that one more ring. And
what year was that?
2012, I think. Maybe 2013. It might have been the 2012 season and the 2013 Super Bowl.
I'll look it up. Let's see. Because now I'm curious where they were. Nope, it must have been 2012. Let's see. 2012. Yeah, they were the 4. They were the 4 seed. Then they won the North. So this was before they switched to 7 seeds. So yeah, they played that first game against Indianapolis in the wild card game, and then they had the crazy game against Peyton Manning's Broncos where Flacco threw the Hail Mary to what the hell is his name that I'm blanking on? That kick returner.
Yeah, Jacoby Jones.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He threw that bomb to him, 70 yards to win that game in Mile High. Then they went to the AFC Championship game again for a second year in a row to go play New England, and they went on down and beat Tom Brady and the Patriots, and then went on to the Super Bowl to beat the 49ers. So, that was a magical run from the 4 seed for sure. I remember all those games pretty vividly.
Mm-hmm. And it'll be interesting to see if we end up with, I guess we wouldn't be getting a Har Bowl, but we could get some Har Championships or something like that off of the Chargers and Ravens.
Right.
Assuming Jim comes in and turns that team around.
Right. So for mine, I go with my favorite memory obviously was the Eagles' first time getting in against the Patriots in 03 or 04, whichever one it was. For me as a fan, that was my big one, even though they lost it. Just 3 years of heartbreak in a row, losing in the NFC Championship game when they probably had the best team, all year in those ones. And then obviously getting past the Falcons, going to the Super Bowl to play the Patriots, didn't end how we wanted it to. So that one was the most memorable for me as a fan. As just a person who loves football, I think one of the greatest Super Bowls was the Steelers and the Cardinals. I think that was 2008. I would argue has the greatest play in Super Bowl history, the James Harrison 100-yard run.
That was going into halftime, where if he got downed 1 yard short, it wasn't even like no points at all. Like, it wasn't even a chance to score a touchdown, kick a field goal, anything like that.
And I would argue the greatest throw and the greatest catch in NFL history happened in that game too, where Roethlisberger threw that ball to Santonio Holmes in the corner, and he just basically was on his tiptoes and caught it. There's a certain version of that throw. I saw it at the Hall of Fame where they show it from the corner of the end zone, and it's just he threw it just absolutely on a dime, on a rope, through 3 Cardinals players. I don't know how he got them through there, right to Holmes, who's on his tippy toes catching that ball for the touchdown. So that was absolutely crazy. So.
Yeah, you even had the slant from Larry Fitzgerald that just you thought that the Steelers were going to be rough, because right at the beginning of the game, it slant to Larry Fitzgerald that goes like 60 yards to the house.
Yeah,
it kind of set the tone for like, okay, we're going to have a lot of big plays this game.
Yeah, I think that was in the
James Harrison, and
I want to say that Fitzgerald one was in the second half, and that's how the Cardinals started coming back.
Maybe.
I think that's how that one happened.
I'm just remembering the play, because it was one of those things where you saw him catch the ball, you're like, oh, it's a slant, and he's about to get walloped by the safety, and the safety just missed him. And
it's Larry Fitzgerald. Like, he's not some speed burner like, Steve Smith or, whoever. He's not a speed burner. So, yeah, him taking it there, that was another Kurt Warner team, man. Kurt Warner resurrected his career that season, too. So, yeah, that was just like I said, I can argue the greatest play, the greatest catch, and the greatest throw all in the same game. So, that one's always stood out to me, even though I absolutely hate the Steelers. Cardinals, whatever, I don't care for them that much either. I'll admit that. That's probably those three greatest plays all in the same game. So, that's the one that always stuck out to me.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it for us on this one. Anything you got to share or bring up before we get out of here, Koopa?
I just want to say, go check out the website, southharmonff.com. We've got most everything linked on there. So
yeah,
if you just remember going to southharmonff.com, you can go and find everything else that we've been talking about.
Right. And are you, is it Koopa Troopa 8 on Twitter as well?
It is at Dynasty Koopa.
Yeah, Dynasty Koopa, that's right.
So
yeah.
Go on there. I don't tend to post too much, but when I do, it's usually something good. Like, it'll maybe be once a month I'll post something. You'll be like, ooh, that's an interesting nugget that Koopa's posted. So I'm a pretty easy follow.
Okay.
I won't clog up your feed.
There you go. Yep. So make sure you give him a follow there. You can follow me at Eric Vanek NFL. Follow the show at America's Game Pod as well. At South Harmon FF on Twitter and YouTube as well. Like I said, we're posting up the Dynasty team reviews. You can see what they're all about. If you're interested in purchasing one, you can purchase one. And the WoRP tool, we just kind of give you guys a crash course into it of how it works, how it looks. And it's a tool that you're definitely going to use for all your leagues. So I definitely recommend it. Go check it out. $6.90 a month, $69 for the year. So you can't beat that price to help you win some Dynasty leagues this year. So with that, thank you, Koopa. We'll have you back next month when we do the running back WoRP show. So I appreciate having you on, man.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So until next week, guys, we'll see you. Have a good one.